Welcome back to our course on Excel 2013 Advanced. In this section and the next, we're going to look at stock charts in some detail. These are very powerful, very important types of chart that Excel has been able to do for some time. But in order to fully appreciate how stock charts work, you need to understand a little bit about stock market prices. So in this first section, I'm going to explain the basics. If you already know the basics, then you may be able to skip this section, but I hope you don't, because during this section I'll introduce you to the data we're going to use in the next section. So first of all, I'm going to get some prices from Yahoo Finance. So I've already chosen a stock. If you're going to work along with this, why don't you choose a different one to me, but you need to know the symbol, or you can look for a name. I'm going to use one of the first ones that appears. It's Alliance Bernstein Holding LP. If I click on Get Quotes, I will get quotes for that particular stock from Yahoo Finance. One of the things I perhaps should point out here is that when Excel was much younger, the graphing and charting available in Excel was really very impressive. It still is impressive, but it was partly very impressive then because there was so little else available in the public domain that could do good graphing and charting. Since that time, however, the graphing and charting that you see every day on the internet, and particularly in relation to finance, is so good now that it probably challenges Excel in terms of what you can do. And even on a publicly accessible site like Yahoo Finance, you've got a chart here showing stock prices for Alliance Bernstein Holding LP on the right. If you were to click on this and click on Customize Chart down in the bottom right corner there, you could actually do some pretty good charting using what's on this website. But that's not what we're doing here. What we're going to do here is to chart the performance of Alliance Bernstein Holding LP using Excel. So first thing to do is to click on Historical Prices on the left. And once we've clicked on Historical Prices, we get a table showing prices. Note the start date, April 15th, 1988. Today's date, May 17th, 2013. There are 25 years worth of data available. And surprisingly, in some ways, when you get stock market data from virtually every source, it's pretty much always presented in the same tabular format. So it's ideal for processing in Excel. You have a date, that's a day. You have an opening price for the stock, a high, a low, a close, the volume of stock, and an adjusted close. And apart from seeing those prices, you also see sometimes a dividend, and sometimes what will happen is a thing called a split. Now, before we go too much farther, I'm going to talk to you about adjusted close, dividend and split. So first of all, let's look at the dividend that was paid on May 9th. If you look at the close and the adjusted close for May 16th, that was yesterday, they're the same, going back in time, right back to when the dividend was paid, those two are the same. But before that, there was a difference. And what happens when a company pays a dividend is that the stock market says, well, if you were able to pay a dividend, your stock price must have been overpriced the day before. So although the closing price was $25.58, we are going to reduce that by the value of the dividend. So we're going to reduce all of your previous closing prices by 38 cents in this case. So it goes from $25.58 down to $25.20. The day before that it was $25.45, should have been $25.07, and so on. So when a dividend is paid, that's what happens. The other thing that sometimes happens, although in general it happens quite rarely, but it does sometimes happen, is a thing called a split. And what happens with a split is that company decides to double the number of its shares. So let's suppose it's got 100,000 shares. It says, right, from today we're going to have 200,000 shares, and everybody who's got some shares is actually going to have twice as many shares. Now the immediate effect of that is that the value of each share that somebody holds is halved. So if I had 1,000 of that 100,000 shares and one day somebody said to me, okay, you've got 2,000 now, I'd be rather disappointed then to find that the value of each share had been halved to compensate. Now again, when that happens, the adjusted close is changed accordingly. Now the upshot of all this is that when you are doing historical analysis on stock prices, you don't use the close, you use the adjusted close. If you used the close, then things like dividends and splits would actually give you a very misleading picture, whereas the adjusted close gives you a much more reliable and consistent picture. And as we'll see towards the end of this section, when we come to doing our plot, we are also going to adjust the other prices as well, but more of that later on. So that's what dividends and splits are all about. Now what I'm going to do is to get these prices. Let me just scroll down to the bottom of this page. A couple of things down there. One of them is, it does specify here that the currency is in US dollars. If you wanted to work in a different currency, of course, if you have your local currency set, you may well be getting prices in the local currency anyway. If not, then clearly you would need to apply a currency conversion if you wanted to work in your local currency. And just above that, there's a link here, download to spreadsheet, and it's download to spreadsheet that we're going to use in just a moment. Just before we do, back up the top again, notice over here the options we have when we're displaying on this web page: daily, weekly, monthly, dividends only. Some people are just interested in how often a company pays a dividend, for example. But okay, let's go down now and do our download of these prices. Now when I click on download, I'm given an option. Do I want to open the data? Do I want to save it? Now the data will be provided as a CSV file, a comma separated values file. CSV files are very commonly the way that financial data is interchanged. I'm going to choose open on this occasion because when I do an open of a CSV file on my installation, it opens a CSV file in Microsoft Excel, which is exactly what I want to happen. And that's probably how your installation is set up as well. But if you'd actually like to save this CSV file, absolutely no problem. I'll leave you to do that if you're working along with me. And then when you open that CSV file, it may well be that you choose to open it in Excel, because we're going to be doing the work on it in Excel. So I'm going to click on the open option. And there we are, there's my data. I've got the most recent price, which is for yesterday, May 16th, 2013, and then right down at the bottom I've got the oldest price right back to the beginning, which was April 15th, 1988. So I have all of my data. Now when it comes to plotting this data, I'm not going to plot all of it. I'm only going to plot the last, say, 3 years worth, because everything I need to show you I can show you on the basis of 3 years worth of data. Having said that, with modern machines, and given that Excel now is pretty quick on these things, it would still plot 25 years worth of data incredibly quickly. Now before we actually set about drawing charts, we need to do a couple of other things to this data, because although the close figure is adjusted to be the adjusted close for the two reasons that I described earlier related to dividends and splits, in order to be consistent when we come to drawing our charts, we need to adjust the high and low figures in a compatible way. Now the generally accepted way of doing this is to scale each of those figures by the ratio of adjusted close to close. You might think, well, why don't we just not, in the example we just looked at, 38 cents off of the high prices and 38 cents off of the low prices. But of course in a day the variation can be quite extreme in between high and low, and the idea of using the ratio instead is to scale each of those in a more proportionate way. So it's pretty straightforward calculation to do. What I'm just going to do is I'm just going to freeze the top pane there, and then what I'm going to do is introduce a column here. I'm just going to call this ratio, and it's going to be the ratio of, it equals the adjusted close, which in this case is G2, divided by the close, which is E2, and that gives me a ratio which is 1 there, and then I'm just going to fill it down, and I've got that ratio right down to the end of my data. Now what I'm going to do is to produce a column with adjusted high, so that's going to be adjusted high. In this case that will be equal to the high, which in this case is C2, times the ratio, which is H2. Obviously that will be the same in this case, and then also an adjusted low. Same sort of principle. Formula in this case is going to be the low, which is D2, times the ratio again, which is H2, and again there we are. And now I'm going to fill both of those down as well. So there we are. Don't worry too much about the order of the columns here, because as we're going to see in the next section, when it comes to drawing stock charts, you need to be very careful about the order of the columns, but you need to get them in the right order for the right sort of stock chart. But we'll come back to that in the next section. So I've done all the adjustments. However, there's one fly in the ointment here, one thing which I haven't addressed, which you will very occasionally need to deal with, and that's this. If there is a split, then although the figures that you download from Yahoo or whatever other source you use will have adjusted close against close, which will deal with that split, the high and low figures will not have been addressed in terms of that split. So on the occasion that a split occurs, you will need to identify a split has occurred and adjust the high and low figures accordingly. Now with this particular stock, over the time period we're going to look at, that didn't happen, and I don't want to be too distracted into dealing with that now. And bear in mind that splits don't happen that often, but that is one other thing to be aware of. Having said that, we've now got all the numbers we need to plot some stock charts. That's what we're going to do in the next section, so please join me for that.